Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically and I was diagnosed with a panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job, that's for certain. So I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectation of the job. All I wanted to do was my job, get paid, and go home as I had 2 children at home and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months and I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly until one day I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity. So I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did hang out, and pretty frequently. We were friends for about a month at this point, and one day, he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with them when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's terrible sometimes. Like the other day I forgot to take the trash out and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where someone's actually threatened me, but she's got good intentions, you know? When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we've only been friends for about a month, so I thought that maybe he was just being sort of morbid, probably joking, and I sort of chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking. She really did." And that specifically concerned me. Now fast forward about 8 months, they're still together and we all hang out pretty regularly, forgetting the things that he told me then. And one day, we were all talking and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude, I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me though. He had them on her when I asked. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, and he responded, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" Of course, I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you then, no one will." He said that he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go, then you can come stay with me until you get her out of the house, you know?" Fast forward to another year, he finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out at work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me, okay?" And that struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job and she asked me where he was, and I said, I have no idea. I thought he was with you guys. You went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by and he called the police about it. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around and I said I hadn't, and he says, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why, and he said to me, "Because she's out of jail, and her cousins are in town trying to find the people that she has personal vendettas with. You're one of them." At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town, took 2 weeks off of work. Come to find out that the next day, Her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it happened. The reason why he knew that they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everyone regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that they shot. The 4th name on that list was mine. After they found the evidence and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided to not inform anyone else of what was going on. When I was 16, my girlfriend and I, yes, female and female relationship, but we weren't really doing anything at the time. Well, we were on the bus. We were just sitting and listening to music, doing homework, and I had my arm over the back of her seat. I leaned over and kissed her on the head. 30 seconds later, I feel her stiffen up and look at me. I look at her and she mouthed the words, "Someone is touching me." I whip around, and this disgusting old man is stroking the back of her neck. So I stand up and look down at him and yell, "What do you think you're doing?" He smiles at me and asks, "Are the 2 of you sisters?" I tell him, "No, you disgusting weirdo." To which he replies, "Ah, that's a shame. I wanted to see you guys kiss." The bus was full, so we couldn't move without losing our seat, so I told him to leave us alone and sat back down. Not a minute later, I feel him reach under my arm and start to twirl her hair. I stood up to look at him and he just laughs and says, "Come on, I just want to see a little kiss. Kiss her for daddy." Ew. I whipped around and pushed my way to the front of the bus and stopped the bus driver, who we knew because we always caught the same route. Thankfully, it was Uncle Pat, a big Hawaiian guy who took care of us school kids like we were his own family. He kicked it into overdrive and sped up to get off the freeway and pulled over at the next stop with a screech. Flew open the back door, stood up and announced to the bus that he needed a path cleared. Marched to the back of the bus, looked at my girlfriend and asked, "Is that him?" She meekly says yes, and I near broke my neck nodding so hard. He grabbed the guy by the arm and marched him right out of the bus and nearly threw him on the sidewalk. As he closed the doors, he yelled, "If I wasn't on the clock, every one of those fingers would be broken, you understand? And people would be cheering because no one in the world is going to defend a sicko like you, going around and touching teenagers. Before you ever think about doing that again, you remember me, and remember how alone and small you feel right now. Then you start praying that I never see you again, so long as you live, because I'm not done with you, and I'll never be done with your kind." Uncle Pat rightfully got everyone's applause on the bus heading back to his seat, and we brought him lunch the next day. We did see that guy again, but only through the bus window. Come to find out, this bus passed right by his house, but since Uncle Pat made a few promises that he seemed eager to keep, he was then forced to catch another bus whose closest stop was a 45-minute walk away. 18 years later, I was still with my back to a wall whenever possible, and after a previous attempt like that, he managed to restore some of my faith in bus drivers. So thank you to all the Uncle Pats of the world for scaring the monsters away when us kids can't. I grew up with my dad and brother. My mom died when I was 10. I was 13 at this point, and my brother was 16 and was out with friends. I used to go out until late at night drinking in the park with friends. My dad was an alcoholic and always too drunk to know if I was home or not, and I had free reign and no rules or boundaries. My dad used to invite some random alcoholic or drug-using strangers into the house. Often when I came home, these strangers and my dad would be passed out or asleep from too much alcohol, or they would barely notice that I was there and I'd go straight to my room. One day I'd come back from being out with friends. It was the early hours. I walked through the living room to go upstairs to my room and my dad was asleep on the armchair. The guy he'd brought back was around mid-50s. I didn't recognize him. He looked at me and something was off about him. He smiled and stared and tried to start a conversation with me, but I was keen to get to my bedroom. I went upstairs and got my PJs on for bed and then dashed to use the bathroom. As I was walking to the bathroom, he said to me, "You look nice in those pajamas." And he was smiling at me and creeping me out. I went back to my room instead of using the bathroom and I shut the door behind me. I had a lock on my bedroom door and I used that. He was then trying to open my bedroom door, and I was so scared because I knew something was off and that he had bad intentions. I dragged my bed across my room to block the door, just in case he barged in and tried to break the lock. He's knocking on the door. "I'm just trying to say hello. Don't be so rude. Open the door." I'm not responding. I'm actually panicking. I was a smart 13-year-old and I knew in that moment that I was in danger. The bed is blocking the door and it's still locked and I can hear him pushing against the door, trying to get inside. I opened my bedroom window and I screamed again and again, "Help! Help, please," at the top of my lungs. What I later found out was that my neighbor heard me and, knowing my dad was an alcoholic, was assuming something had happened to him. He came around and must have seen that my dad was asleep. He comes up to my room and he's knocking to get in and I can hear his voice, a voice of safety. Although I trusted my neighbor, I'm so shook up that I'm now just sat in the corner of my room in a ball, crying, shaking and panicked. He knocks the door open and is pushing it open against the weight of the bed. He came in and checked on me, assuming that I must be hurt. He just holds me whilst I compose myself and try and explain what has happened. The man is now gone, but I knew that he would come back any time in the future, and my dad was never sober enough for me to have ever been able to explain. And this was the final straw for social services, and that's the night that I ended up in the care system. So something really creepy happened to me yesterday. I'm still processing it because, God. But a bit of context, I live in Ireland. Pretty peaceful country, recently moved from Galway to Dublin. Moved to North Dublin, which is the rougher part, but it's still not too bad. I live with my family outside the city, could be considered the countryside. The area is pretty rural, it's just houses and farms pretty much with no shops or stations nearby. Mind you, there are a lot of houses around, but we are all distant as we have big gardens. There are no sidewalks and the road is pretty narrow and worn out, and it's rare to see cars, so it's fine to just kind of go on the road. I went on my daily 2K run, which I usually do at around 6 p.m. However, yesterday I had some studying to do and didn't head out until around 9 p.m. when it was quite dark outside. Now let me describe the experience. Imagine on the left there was a house with lights on, and on the right you'd see a field or a farm. Then there was an abandoned building right next to it, followed by an area of trees for about 200 meters or so. This pretty much sums up the entire road. It wasn't completely abandoned, but it was creepy enough to give me chills at night. Anyways, I usually listen to music on my run with the volume all the way up, so I can't really hear anything around me. So as I reached the area with a patch of trees, it was pitch black and the lights didn't work properly. Occasionally they would turn on and then flicker back off. Therefore, I had to use a flashlight to navigate. While a song from West Side Story was blasting in my headphones, I suddenly noticed the lights flickering back on, which was a relief. However, that's when I saw it. A figure standing about 30 meters away, roughly 20 meters from the road amidst the trees. At first, I thought I was just imagining things, but no. The figure was there, completely still, not moving at all. It sent shivers down my spine, so I kept running. I turned down the volume of my music just in case to be able to hear any movement from the figure in case I needed to make a run for it. I increased my speed and passed by the figure, all while still trying to keep my music low. After I had distanced myself by about 100 meters, I turned up the music and tried to process what had happened. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me because of the darkness. At this point, I was far away, but I knew that I'd have to return home, and I usually walked back the distance I ran, so I'd have to pass that spot again. This time, the lights were flickering, but they mostly stayed on. I tried to keep an eye on the spot where I had seen the figure, but now there was nothing there. Nothingness, and I was still creeped out. I turned off my music and started to run past that spot quickly because I was scared. Suddenly, a man jumped across the street right in front of me, and it looked like the same figure. I came to a halt for a second, shocked, and then he started moving. I turned around and began running as fast as I could. As I did, he started screaming for help, literally screaming at the top of his lungs while running after me. Eventually, I passed the trees and reached the area with the houses. Someone heard me screaming and came out, asking if everything was okay. I stopped running and realized that the guy was now gone. I explained everything to the person who came to help me. At that point, I was extremely creeped out and scared. I still had to get back home, though, but my parents weren't there. They had gone to their friend's house, leaving me home alone. I asked the stranger for a lift because I was not going back to that area again. Thankfully, the stranger turned out to be helpful and kindly escorted me home. I locked all the doors and checked everything to make sure that I was safe. Shortly after, my parents arrived, but I didn't tell them anything because I didn't want them to worry. I haven't gone out for a run today because I'm genuinely scared. I'm terrified just thinking about what could have happened if I had been too tired to run and he had caught me. I'll update you guys if anything else happens, although I hope nothing else does. I'm a 29-year-old female and have been hiking at a wooded trail near my house for about 3 years now, and it's my favorite trail due to the beautiful waterfalls and meadows, but had several creepy encounters over the years. Luckily, I always hike with my 90-pound Burmese, Baker. He's the sweetest boy, but will protect me. First encounter was 3 years ago in the winter, when I was walking up a hill and Baker starts growling, unlike I've ever heard. I look around and realize that there's a man in the shadow of the woods, watching us. And when I notice him, he starts walking slowly towards us with his head covered. I said hello as usual and he didn't respond. I kept walking and got a feeling that I should turn back. When I did, I realized that he had turned around on the trail, middle of a hill, so not a common turnaround point. But once he saw me, he walked into the woods and stared out at the valley hugging a tree. Nothing too crazy, but it just felt very off. Around the same time a year later, Baker and I were walking on the same trail and again, Baker starts growling. He's usually very excited to meet anyone and anything. I realize there appears to be the same man standing off in the shadows watching us, but I figured that maybe Baker just scared him so he was standing away from us, waiting to cross the bridge. Otherwise, he easily could have kept walking along the trail instead of waiting for us. We crossed the bridge and kept walking. I again got a feeling that I should turn around. When I do, I realize he's behind us, so had no reason to be waiting for us to cross the bridge. I sit down with Baker by my side and pull out my phone while making it clear that I've seen him, not staring, just glancing in his direction. He stops when I turn around, even though I'm off the trail and not in his way, but he continues walking after I pull out my phone. I start walking back and find a large stick that he left, that had been sharpened with a knife into a spear. I take that spear and continue walking, while looking around me the entire time. I know now that I should have reported it at this point, but I just convinced myself that I was being paranoid. About a year later, in the winter, I'm walking along the same path. Maybe stupid, but I took a year off and again just convinced myself that I was paranoid. It's snowing with the trails mostly empty, and I suddenly see a bunch of trees with frowning faces made out of snow, despite not seeing anyone on the trail for miles. Baker again starts growling at something in the woods that I can't see, so we turn around. I don't report it because I figured that it would never be taken seriously. And then today, a few months later, I'm walking along the trail and find a tree with "I see you" written in chalk. I immediately get a weird feeling and turn back and report it to the park rangers and police. Now, update. I'm working with park rangers to keep an eye out. After sharing in my hiking groups on Facebook, several women have come forward with similar experiences at the same place. One woman was stalked by a man in a full snowsuit in the middle of July on this trail. Another was followed all the way to her car with him appearing along the trail watching her from the woods at various points. All of you calling me stupid for hiking on my favorite trail after waiting a year to go back are typical victim blamers, and I don't like you. I'm listening to the suggestions not to go back, but belittling me is unnecessary. I'm scared enough. Now, update 2. 6 different women have come forward with similar experiences with a similar-looking man at the same park. They've all reported it to the rangers. I've interviewed with the local news. They reached out to me, and it's everywhere. Rangers are not happy with me for sharing with the public, but that's fine with me as everyone has the right to know. Someone wiped off the "I see you" message before the news team could see it, and it rained, but not that heavily. 3 separate women messaged me thinking it was the same guy, despite the women not knowing each other. They stated that he is unstable and spends most of the days at this park. His cousin reported him too, and I shared his name and photo with the rangers, and apparently the suspect is an old park ranger himself, so we shall see. Oh, and the suspect apparently loves climbing trees and has a bunch of photos of himself 50 feet in the air, so he's probably up in the trees watching and is the one who left that message. Now, final update. Apparently he has a secret spot in these woods where he has a chainsaw and gasoline, and we reported that to the rangers. Pretty sure having a secret campground in a public park is illegal with or without a chainsaw, and stalking and intimidation is a form of illegal assault, so there's no reason that he can't at least be questioned. I was on vacation with my family when I was about 14. I was in the pool, which had a bar attached, and I was casually talking to this group of British people. I want to say it was all guys, but I think I remember a girl with them. I started drinking a bit with them. The legal drinking age was 18, but the people who I was drinking with gave me an extra wristband that they had because apparently they were leaving the resort that day and wanted to give it to someone. My parents didn't know about this, and neither of them knew that I was even drinking. They were clearly a lot older and kept putting drink after drink in my hand, and I was ecstatic because I was, well, getting drunk in a pool in Cancun and out of sight from my mother. They started to try to convince me that one of the guys in the group was 15 and that I should talk to him because he liked me. Even then, I knew that he definitely was not 15, but he also wasn't as old as the others who seemed to be in their late 30s. In hindsight, I'm thinking maybe mid to late 20s. I was young and just thought that they were joking around with me. They kept telling me that he liked me and that I should go hang out with him, and I laughed it off the first time, but they just kept suggesting it. Keep in mind, this whole time my dad was in the same pool talking to his friend, and he had his eyes on me for almost the entire time as well. And my parents are very strict. He didn't know what I was drinking was actually alcoholic, and the pool was big enough that you couldn't hear what was being said. At that point, I was totally wasted. My first time actually getting seriously drunk. I don't even remember leaving the pool with this guy, trying to tell me that he was 15, but apparently my stupid self did because I remember thinking that he was cute. The resort is huge, and I don't know how I don't remember walking through the whole thing and not remembering it. I wonder what we spoke about. The next thing I remember is walking and approaching a bus stop that was a 10-minute walk from the resort. I know it was 10 minutes because my family and I often went to the bus stop to explore Cancun. He told me I had a nice body and asked me if I've ever been intimate with anyone. I just started laughing, and he sat on the bus bench and pulled me onto his lap. At this point, my world is spinning, so I don't protest, even though I remember thinking that I wanted to be back at the pool. It was then that something beautiful happened. I threw up all over him. Remember, I'm on his lap at this point, so it was like right in the middle of his face and on his chest, and kept throwing up, like the Exorcist level projectile vomiting. He was extremely grossed out, and I don't remember what was said, but we ended up walking back to the resort, and I never saw him again. I remember feeling so embarrassed, which is ridiculous in hindsight. I wobbled back to the pool area, covered in throw-up, where my mom had called the police, and her and my dad were freaking out. My mom's piercing voice sobered me up pretty quick because I remember those parts a lot clearer even though they're still hazy. They saw how drunk I was and demanded to know what had happened, so I told them, and then they got furious. My mom was adamant on finding that guy or his friends who had all disappeared from the pool. I didn't really see what the big deal was back then and why she wanted to find them. To this day, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't thrown up like that and actually left with him. I was 5'2" and 14 years old, and he was at least a foot taller than me and definitely not a minor. I remember when he was close to me with no one around, and even in my extremely drunk state, I started to get a bit nervous. My parents took me back to our hotel room, and I spent hours in the bathtub just throwing up. My mom was furious, like completely livid. I wasn't too surprised at that because she yelled at me over trivial things all the time. And so was my dad, which surprised me because he was always so easygoing and honestly probably would have been a bit amused at me being drunk, throwing up. Not in a cruel way, but because I was learning a lesson about alcohol that we all eventually do. He actually straight up told me that at some point before this whole vacation. But now I know that his anger wasn't directed towards me. He was cursing about the guy. I was still throwing up in the bathtub, and they both went into the kitchen area to talk away from me, but I could vaguely hear my dad cursing terribly while speaking to my mom in our native language, and I was actually scared. I couldn't quite focus on his voice because I was legitimately drifting in and out of consciousness at this point, but I remember getting less scared and more just sad because I felt like I had disappointed him. He never got mad like that towards me, but then again, I realized later that he wasn't angry at me, and he wasn't angry at the drinking. He was just angry at that scumbag. I remember wondering why they were making such a big deal. It was a few years later that I understood. Later on that day, because this all happened at like 2 in the afternoon, so I was at least cognizant by dinner time, I expected my mom to blow up at me over dinner when I was sober, as she usually does. That woman's like a live fuse, but they were both kind of just quiet and staring at me and didn't leave my side. I can't imagine what they were going through, knowing about the danger that I had been in hours before, staring at me like it was a miracle that I was there. I was young and stupid, but I would like to give my deep thanks and gratitude to beer for constantly annoying my stomach to the point of projectile vomiting. Almost 3 years ago, I was 17 years old, and by that point, I had become accustomed to finding myself in difficult situations. All I had was my mother, but she struggled to hold down a job for long due to her own personal issues. As I grew up, we frequently moved in and out of houses with roommates. We never really had a stable place to call our own except for 2 short-lived instances, and we often found ourselves forced into new environments at the drop of a hat. So when I turned 17, we once again faced the prospect of homelessness. I had grown somewhat used to it by then, having spent more nights sleeping on the streets than I would have liked. The day came when we had to leave our roommate's house. My mother had the option to stay at her boyfriend's trailer, but I had nowhere to go. By that time, I had distanced myself from my friends as I had realized their negative influence on my health and mental state. My mother offered me the chance to stay with her, but I declined. I felt that it would be awkward to come between her and her boyfriend, and in a strange way, I had grown accustomed to life on the streets. So, there I was, dropped off at a McDonald's where I ate some burgers before venturing back onto the streets. As the sun disappeared, darkness enveloped the world, and I began searching for a place to spend the night. I entered numerous places that night in an attempt to find some rest, but none of them seemed suitable. It was either too hot, too bright due to the lights, or I was being attacked by mosquitoes. That's when I remembered a house that I used to visit to relax. It was under construction and nearly completed, with all the doors shut and the windows in place keeping the mosquitoes out. I entered through the back, as I usually did, and made my way upstairs. Eventually, I settled in the bathroom because it had less debris on the floor. I lay there, trying to sleep, and after some time, I heard noises downstairs. Initially, I brushed them off, thinking that it might be the door that I had entered earlier, swinging open and closed. I continued to ignore the sounds, even as they persisted. After about an hour, I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go out and sit on the back porch. I made my way downstairs and out the back door to the porch. I fiddled with my phone for about 5 minutes when something caught my eye. I saw movement to my left, just beyond the back door that I had exited. I turned to look, and time seemed to stand still. At first, I thought it was an illusion, but I was wrong. There was a man, shrouded in darkness, peeking past the wall, gazing at me. His lower half was hidden behind the wall, so I couldn't see anything except his upper body. He leaned to the left, as if though he didn't want me to see his full figure. The man was a silhouette, pure black with no discernible features. I continued to stare at him for what felt like an eternity, but he didn't move. I expected him to come outside and talk to me, as I often converse with homeless people, and I assumed that he was one of them. However, he remained completely still, as silent as a mouse. Perhaps if I hadn't noticed him, he would have continued to observe me. Eventually, I got up, retrieved my bicycle, and left the property. As I walked out of the backyard, I glanced through the window next to the door where I'd seen the man. The moonlight revealed that he was still there, now watching me leave. I could see the top of his head and his left eye, but he remained cloaked in darkness. He was a tall white male wearing some kind of jacket, though I couldn't make out many details. After seeing this, I hurried away. I reached the front of the house on the street and peered inside, but he was nowhere to be seen. I got on my bicycle and waved goodbye to the house, feeling that the man was still watching me, and then I rode away. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, despite trying 2 different spots. And this is where my story ends. I didn't experience a dramatic chase or life or death flight, but this was real life, not a movie or a book. I'll never know why that man was in the house, but I assumed that he was seeking shelter, just like me. However, the way that he stared at me was deeply unsettling. It makes me wonder how long he had been there and what might have happened if I had fallen asleep inside. Would he have continued to watch me, completely unnoticed? Or did he have other intentions? I'll never know, but after that experience, I decided never to enter a house like that again. I have an adopted older sister who we'll call Julie. Long story short, my parents thought that they couldn't have children, so they adopted her, and a year later, they unexpectedly had me. I'd always known that Julie was adopted, and honestly, I never really thought much of it. Adopted or not, she's my big sis, and just as much a part of the family as I am. That being said, I knew that there was something off with her, even from a young age. She's 10 years older than me, so I was still a kid when she was a teenager, but I think on some level I understood that she had some real mental health problems. She would often be taken to see psychologists and therapists and other people like that. When she was home, she would spend all of her time alone in her room, and she would do things like skip school, drink alcohol, and smoke weed, things I always were taught were wrong. She always wore long sleeves around me, and the few times I saw her without them, I noticed that she had scars on her arms and legs, though it wasn't until later that I found out what kind of scars they were. One night when I was 8, I walked in on her holding our dad's gun in her mouth. Even though I was young, I was somehow able to put the pieces together. Both of us broke down crying, and I somehow managed to talk her out of it. I remember afterward asking my parents and other adults around me why Julie would do such a thing, and feeling so frustrated and lost when they all told me that I was too young to understand. Years go by, and we're both old enough to drink now. One night, we're just hanging out at her apartment, talking and having a few drinks, and she reminds me of the time that I saved her life. I had almost forgotten, to be honest. I confided in her about how lost I felt at the time because I wanted to understand, but nobody ever told me what was going on with her. She just stares at me for a few seconds and then hits me with, "Did nobody ever tell you what happened with my birth parents?" I was dumbfounded. To be honest, I did sometimes wonder if she remembered her birth parents or any of her life before she was adopted. She was 9 years old when she was adopted after all, but when I asked her before, she told me that she didn't remember. Before her life with us, Julie was born to a pair of drug addicts who lived out in the country. She remembers the house that she grew up being in filthy and falling apart, having no running water and appliances that barely worked. Both of her parents were physically abusive, but her father was the worst of the two. She talked about how her father would beat her mother until she was nearly unconscious and then have his way with her while she couldn't fight back, all while Julie was forced to watch. Eventually, her father started abusing her too. Oftentimes, he forced himself on her in bed while her mother would just watch helplessly, too high to do anything. She didn't go to school, so there was no way for her to get away from the abuse. When she was 7, they started pimping her out to other people for drug money. Julie had downed half a bottle of whiskey at this point, telling the story, and she told me about all the things that were done to her by those men in explicit detail. I couldn't possibly repeat it here, but it made me feel probably the sickest I'd ever felt. Her parents even filmed her abuse and sold the videos. It all came to a head one night when they got a knock on the door from the cops. She doesn't remember exactly how it all went down, but the one thing she does remember is watching her father grab a kitchen knife and stab her mother over and over in the chest. The cops must have heard Julie screaming because they broke down the door and tackled him to the ground, shouting the whole time. One of the cops grabbed her by the arm and took her outside. She remembers them trying to cover her eyes so she wouldn't see her mother's body, as if she didn't just watch her be killed right in front of her. She was taken away to a children's hospital that night, but later she found out that her mother didn't survive and her father was sentenced to life in prison, and apparently he took his own life just a few years into his sentence. By the time she finished telling her story, I threw up. Partly because of the alcohol, but mostly because I was in a state of shock. I had never heard such a sickening story in my life, let alone from my own family. I had known Julie for the whole 21 years of my life, and I couldn't believe this was hidden from me the whole time. I thought I could finally understand what she was going through growing up, but in reality, I had no idea. It's been a few months now since I've known the truth, and after the initial shock wore off, I have a whole new level of respect for her. Despite everything she went through, she still grew up to be the strongest, coolest person I know. All the times she stood up for me when I was being bullied in school, the times she comforted me when I was going through high school relationships, even the times we spent just playing Smash Brothers together, they mean so much more to me now. I'm glad my parents chose to adopt her and give her a second chance at life, and I couldn't ask for a better big sister. This took place back around the fall of 2020, around late October. One night, 3 of my friends, Nate, Charles, and Jordan, and I decided to meet up at a local park at around midnight, just located within my friend Jordan's neighborhood, to have one of our relentless hotboxing smoke sessions. Since this was our senior year of high school, and with the pandemic and political animosity going on at the time, like many other kids, we were basically stuck at home, for the most part attending online classes and barely getting out of our houses since most public places were closed. Because of this, we all ended up smoking weed to kill time and basically have a little bit of fun, so having these hotbox sessions wasn't anything new to us since we've been smoking since August of that same year. I recently stopped smoking altogether due to unrelated issues, but I digress. About an hour after our smoke session, the 4 of us reluctantly agreed to start driving out of the park and around town for a while, with my friend Jordan being the driver, Nate in the front passenger seat, with Charles and I in the back. Stupid, I know. 20 minutes into our drive, being the intoxicated idiots that we were, having the windows cracked, we decided to put on Dead Space ambience music just for, giggles, as we were making our way out of a residential area and onto a 2-way main road that led out into the rural parts of town. To give you an idea of the scenery, we were driving through one of those semi-rural suburban neighborhoods you'd find out in the middle of nowhere. For those of you who live in the rural South or the Midwest, you'll know what I'm talking about. Since it was completely pitch black and we were practically in the middle of nowhere bumping creepy ambient music while approaching a dimly lit intersection, it began to give off an eerie liminal vibe that was kind of fitting for the season. As we approached the intersection, my mind began to green out and race about the unknown beyond the darkness that enshrined our surroundings. It'd be really terrifying if we came across a humanoid like the Wendigo or something, I said to myself. At that point, we had reached the intersection, and since I was looking to my left, I immediately noticed a figure emerging out of the pitch black. As the figure got under the streetlight, I realized that what I was looking at was a woman in pigtails, dressed in a really classy, clean outfit with a tan blouse and high heels. Instinctively, sobering up, I took this as a bad sign for all the stories I've heard and just knew something was wrong because who the hell would be out at 1 a.m. in a classy outfit out in the middle of nowhere? In a matter of seconds, my worst fear came to life as this woman began to approach the car, and I really didn't want any of us taking any chances with this woman. I started to freak out and told my buddy, "Jordan, there's a woman coming at us. Turn the car now." Our friend Nate noticed a second figure dressed in all black slowly emerge from the rear end of the car, just about 15 feet away by our right side, slowly approaching. This only instilled more fear in all of us about the situation. Charles instantly caught on in what we were seeing as this woman practically began running at us, screaming, "Hey, help me please, stop!" Charles then began aggressively slapping Jordan's shoulder in a panic, shouting at my friend, "Jordan, buddy, turn the car! Jordan, still zooted off the weed, was confused for a split second before he saw that this woman and the woman in black were mere feet from the car. In a panic, he yelled, "Nah, bro," as he peeled the car to the right and in the opposite direction from us where the woman and the figure, which we can see now as a man, came running from. We all sobered up a bit, being creeped out and confused as to what just happened, but laughed it off because of how intoxicated we all still were. Needless to say, we still questioned why this woman was running at us screaming and what the intentions were from the man dressed in all black behind the car. My morbid curiosity gets the better of me sometimes, and I'd like some theories as to what could have happened to all four of us during that night. I go to Planet Fitness every other day, and I notice a worker who cleans the floors and massage chair rooms each time I go. I thought nothing of him until I was on the treadmill and he started cleaning the treadmills from the front at the bottom. I'm not sure how to describe it, but he was bending over and had a full view of my legs and crotch area, and he started 5 treadmills away from me and even cleaned a machine while a guy was on it. He gets to me and I'm uncomfortable with how close he was getting to my legs. It takes him longer to clean. He then cleans the machine on my left. Nobody was on it, but only the tread part, and he goes on his hands and knees and cleans the entire treadmill and takes a long time. He didn't do this to any other treadmill. I noticed that he didn't clean the treadmills that an old lady and man were using in front of me. I was wearing my new yoga shorts and was excited to work out that day until this happened. And now I feel conflicted. So am I overthinking it, or is he just doing his job? I was helping clean up the neighboring lot after a homeless encampment moved when a worker from the city showed up. He beelined straight towards me and started thanking me for the help, so I pointed him in the direction of another lady who headed up the cleanup efforts. He talked to her, arranging a pickup time for the bags, then came back to me, mentioning that we're neighbors and he lives in the illegal apartment that is kind of visible from my backyard. He said he's noticed me for some time. The other neighbors were listening closely and started showing him where, by their house, would be leaving the bags. "Oh, you live here too?" They live one door from me and have been here for over 7 years, whereas I've only been here for 2. The next day, the bags weren't picked up, so they get rummaged through, creating another mess. Fortunately, the city cleaned it up the following day during regular pickup. Great. Then, this guy showed up at my door, talking about how the community organizer, who wasn't me, needed to call the city for pickup, but he took care of it. The community organizer knew that she needed to call, but didn't do so because he showed up in uniform and assured us that it would be taken care of. He offered to help. It's like he came over because he had an excuse to talk to me. When he turned to leave, I started talking to the landlord next door who was doing repairs nearby. However, he just sort of stared and lingered on the sidewalk. Everything about him raises major red flags. Even the neighbors noticed. I guess I need to stop wearing sports bras and tube tops in my yard. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for channel memberships. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember...
Hi guys, my name's Freya, and I am going to tell you a story. Leave a comment down below. What is your favorite scary movie?
Perfect. Got it.
Is that going to be